my name's Laurence. I work at 5V Video and I am one of the senior consultants here. I think fragmentation is one of the main challenges across CTV companies at the moment. I think a lot of the words we hear battered around quite loosely in the industry are things like transformation or consolidation. And I think when you look at the various TV manufacturers, OEMs, you're seeing the rise of OS companies moving away from a more traditional set-top box approach. I think that fragmentation is one of the biggest challenges at the moment. And then from that point is differentiation. How can we be that differentiating point between the different companies, right? So whilst Andy Waltonspiel just mentioned in one of the talks about having friends and enemies in the same room, but I think it's more so on the friendship part. I think with that consolidation, you see a lot of people having to partner up because they're facing the same challenges. I think the thing that teams underestimate in scaling is from that differentiation piece, right? When you think of the three big topics in my eyes, CTV, ad tech, fast channels, is understanding how to leverage those skills, right? I think when you look at the intersection between CTV, ad tech, monetization, right? I think the difficulty is not just finding people with those video skills, right? Coming from that industry, but there's a lot of training that has to be done, right? To get to that point. So as an example, working with some of the OS companies, and if they're wanting to integrate a billing system into their OS, well, it's not just good enough to find a CTV developer who's working in the OS space. It's people who can also work on the billing integration. So I think with the differentiation, there's this added layer of complexity from a scaling perspective, and that takes time. But I suppose that's why companies like ours exist, right? Because we help shorten that lead time and help deal with that complexity. I think it's the big focus on ad tech and how that can be monetized. Just in the talk just now, we're hearing from people like Frank Ripple at Vodafone, right? It's not just about when you think of ad insertion on TV. I'm sure as a consumer, you can probably relate to me, right? There's nothing worse than perhaps seeing an advert that comes up mid-rugby match and you think, well, this isn't at all relevant to me. And I think it's the way in which ad tech can be leveraged to make ad insertion more pertinent and more relevant. I think when we think of that content discovery piece, it's, okay, how can we take something that we all need to work on, ad tech, how we bring those audiences closer? I think that predictive element, like I mentioned, ad insertion sometimes isn't all that relevant, and it's frustrating. Of course, there are services, subscriptions you can buy into to remove ads, but if you want to have an ad-based subscription model, well, you want ads that are going to be relevant to that consumer. So that's when those content discovery recommendation systems come into play. Think Analytics being a prime one. I'm probably doing some of their promotion for them, but they're a really good example of, okay, well, how can we leverage first-party data? How can we leverage what the consumer's data can give us and can tell us in order to make that experience of advertising a lot more pertinent and relevant? Understanding how you can leverage first-party data rather than third-party data to understand your consumer base a bit more. This whole talk of thinking globally but acting locally and understanding what content will resonate in your local area, I think is really important.